I thank all of you for joining us. If at any time you feel the need to just run over and enjoy Dutchess County's #1 historical attraction, I will not take it personally. So feel free to do that. Also, for those of you who are here because you think this is where the bathrooms are, they're actually your next kiosk down on the north side of the trail down there. So now that record keeping and from cleaning is out of the way, I am Will Tatum. I am your Dutchess County Historian, and today, as you can see up on the big screen there, we're going to be talking about the latest of the new trails springing off of the Walkway and the rail trail. This is the North Side Trail, or the North Side Urban Trail, that follows one of the smaller railroad lines off of the main one that used to run right across the Hudson where we're sitting, that primarily served the Hudson River State Hospital, and that history is long and complicated, so we'll talk about the state hospital at a future point in time. What we'll be discussing today are some of the sites that you can see alongside the North Side Trail. Now this trail, because it follows an old rail bed, we don't want to say cuts through, but let's say it follows a lot of Poughkeepsie history, much of which is no longer visible today because of subsequent development. And, you know, in a future program, we might be able to talk about the vanished industrial history of Poughkeepsie. But there are still some rather important remains of the past and several different varieties of stories that you can see, or that are at least nearby to the trail. Now, for those of you who may have already tried it out, you'll know that the trail as it currently exists goes up to Cedar Avenue. There will be an extension that goes from the other side of Cedar Avenue all the way up to Hudson Heritage, the former state hospital site that is currently under construction. In fact, if you drive all the way up Fulton Avenue today, you will cross under the bridge that they are working on to put over the avenue. So some of these sites you can actually see, not necessarily from the rail trail that is, the North Side Trail that is open right now, but will be open in months to come. And just to give you an overview of where we're looking, and I apologize that the red pinpoint doesn't turn out very well, we're going to be moving from south to north. So we're really going to start down where the trail begins on Parker Ave, and there are a number of remnants of industrial sites down there. That used to be a pretty significant industrial area of Poughkeepsie from the 1870s on up really through the 1950s. We're then going to take a walk up to Schatz Federal Ball Bearing, talk about that. The site still exists, and believe it or not, the business still exists, albeit at a different site. One of the sites we won't be talking about in detail, but that has its own history. Next, we'll go up to Western Printing and Lithography, which is more or less completely gone. There's a little bit left of the original building there, but some remarkable tales to tell, and also some modern draws that might bring you up to that site that you can think about when you're shopping. And finally, we'll end on the Children's Home of Poughkeepsie, which is one of the heart-building stories of history that we like to tell to end on a positive note. So, to begin with, one of the things that I want to point out right now before we move on to our first site is you'll see on your right, you've got the modern Google Maps image of the area. On your left, what you have is part of the index page of the Sanborn maps for the city of Poughkeepsie. Now, Sanborn was a fire insurance company that began working in the late 19th century and then was in the business all the way through really towards the end of the 20th century. Their claim to fame is they would go into major built-up urban areas and they would make maps showing not only the outline of every single building along every single street, but also describing what it's made out of, how many stories it is, what is in various parts of those buildings. And the idea is that if you are an insurance broker and you're being asked to write a policy, it's kind of handy to know, is this a brick building? Is this a metal frame building? Is this an old wood frame clapboard building? Does it have fireproof elements? Because these all have bearings on the actuarial math that go into writing an insurance policy. Luckily for us historians, because I'm not in the insurance business, that math is way too complicated for me. This gives us a really beautiful, highly detailed, preserved view of what these areas were like decades in the past. So one of the first maps to come out for Poughkeepsie was in the 1880s. The map that we're going to be drawing from today is actually based on the 1914 Sanborn map that was updated in the 1950s and republished in 1953. And it's one of our last Sanborn maps for the area. If you want to see others, we have them at the county clerk's office at 22 Market Street on the second floor, including a 1914 map with additions made to it in handwriting, which is a really beautiful source. But the one we're going to be using today is from the Library of Congress. So our first stop is Parker Avenue and the Garden Street intersection, right where the North Side Trail begins today, but is also where that rail spur across Parker Avenue at this point back in the 1950s. It's a little earlier than that, but that was a heavily industrialized area of northern Poughkeepsie. And in fact, if you go back to the 1870s, what you'll see is that there's even more businesses there than what we're seeing here. But today, of course, up at the intersection that now has a gas station and a little market, you had a refrigeration business and cold storage. So that's where you could primarily put fruit and other consumable items, but pretty much anything that you needed to literally put on ice. Across the street, where you most recently had a printing business, that was a coal and fuel depot. Then right up next to the Walkway, and it's not really labeled very easily to see from where you're sitting today, that was a grocery business. And we'll take a look at a photo of how it looks today, but walking up the North Side Trail there, you can actually see where they had the landing for the trains to pull up, offload fruits and vegetables, and then continue on their way up into the Hudson River State Hospital. And there are other, if you go down Brookside Drive today, you'll see other remnants of Poughkeepsie's industrial past. This is what looking down Garden Street from the entrance to the North Side Trail looks like today. So where the U-Haul is, that's where the cold storage is, or was. Harmon and Costella is where that coal and fuel business would have been. If we go a little bit further down Garden Street, you'll see Aloy's Restaurant and this older looking brick warehouse there. Well, there was a previous industrial business where Aloy's is today. That building burned down around 1914. The warehouse behind it is a much earlier one, but its use in the 1950s was by IBM because they had storage facilities throughout Poughkeepsie to serve their main operation. And that's your view today if you want to take a gander down there. When you're actually standing on the entrance to the North Side Trail, again on your left there as you're looking north, you will have the remaining building from this wholesale grocery concern. On the right, the restaurant and bar that is still there was a restaurant and bar in the 1950s. And then further up where you now have an auto garage was some other industrial happenings there. So when you begin your journey up the North Side Trail, you're starting in an 1870s area of development in Poughkeepsie. So there we are. So the North Side Trail today on your left there. Originally that was actually a refrigerator plant and an elevator plant, and then it was then converted into wholesale grocery later on. And on your right of that image, you see the restaurant that's been there at least since the 1950s. So moving up, we have the famous Schatz Federal Ball Bearing Factory. So Schatz itself starts out as a Hartford-based business right at the turn of the century. They're into general manufacturing. They buy up, and in 1910, they move over to Poughkeepsie to roughly this site. You're seeing it in the 1940s. A little later on, they decide to found a separate named business on the same site that's still owned by Schatz itself. That's Federal Ball Bearings. They then move on to buy and create something of a vertical monopoly. They buy a business in Waterbury that gives them all the supplies necessary to make ball bearings. And then they go on to become the major source of ball bearings, which are in all kinds of machinery in the 20th century for most of the United States of America. They were so important that during both world wars, there was dedicated security and protection provided both by Dutchess County Government and the federal government to ensure, just like with the Walkway here, that any saboteurs that might be in operation were not going to bother Schatz Federal or the Walkway. They go on to have a contract with Napa Auto Parts, so if you can imagine that for a large section of the 20th century, all of those Napa stores nationwide were being supplied from right here in Poughkeepsie. But then in the 70s, as industry begins to move abroad, things change, the organization loses its contract, and that is our Sanborn map view there of the site. They lose the contract with Napa in 1979, and things quickly begin to fall apart from there. In 1980, they declare bankruptcy. In 1981, the assets of the corporation are sold off. But later in 1981, New Schatz is formed. It's still called Schatz today, and it actually exists at a site that you might be able to dimly see in the background of this image here. So you've got Schatz up front and center, and then sound, because this is a west-looking view. You see those sheds and other buildings there, more or less. You can see it. Look at the instant video replay that Chris is going to put together later. That is actually the site of the Poughkeepsie Foundry. And today, New Schatz is located there. Those are the buildings on the bottom there that you will see on the side of the North Side Trail as you walk up it. The old buildings that were Schatz Federal Ball Bearing are still there. They are in kind of rough shape, but there are a couple of plans that are currently in circulation, or so I'm told, to rehab this as part of preserving and creatively reusing Poughkeepsie's industrial heritage. But this was and continues to be a major part of the industrial history of Dutchess County and Poughkeepsie, and something that you can easily see. So, of course, Mid-Hudson Medical Center, pretty much I imagine most of us here today are familiar with it. It is one of the two major hospitals in Poughkeepsie, then has a very deep history. So the other hospital, Vassar Brothers Hospital, was founded well before St. Francis, but Poughkeepsie was growing at such a degree in the late 19th century and early 20th century that one general hospital was simply not enough to keep up with demand. So stepping into this need was the Sisters of the Order of St. Francis. In 1913, they buy an estate that was located up in that area, and they immediately moved to refit the mansion house, which you can see in that postcard view there, as a new hospital building. They start a fundraising campaign in 1913 that is meant really just to generate money for refitting that structure itself. It manages to raise the better part of $75,000 by the time that they open in 1914. As a 40-bed facility, which today sounds pretty teeny tiny, but in 1914 Poughkeepsie, that was super duper important because it allows the overflow from Vassar to be seen elsewhere. And in fact, for the first couple of years until St. Francis really gets on its feet financially, Vassar provides them with a lot of support, including loaning out their ambulances to transport patients to St. Francis. But beginning, and this is your Sanborn view there to give you a little bit of a better idea of how that initial facility was. Beginning in 1920, they start building what we now know today as the Mid-Hudson Medical Center. And they expand that wing by wing by wing. Your postcard view there on the left is a 1970 overhead view. Your view on the right there is from 1953, technically, is the publication date, so that data was taken sometime in the early 1950s, and you can see it's quite an extension. And in fact, one of the things about Sanborn maps, like any complicated map for a large section of area, sometimes you've got to look at two different pages to see the full extent of a site. So that previous map we looked at, which is helpfully page 79 there, that traffic circle that you see is actually in the top of our view here on that page, so you can see how the site expands. And of course it goes through multiple changes over time, keeping up with all of the most advanced technologies to serve the Poughkeepsie population, and continues in operation under a different name today. So moving right along to one part that unfortunately has disappeared largely from view, we have Western printing and lithography. You've got another 1940s view, much like we had of Schatz Ball Bearing. Up there on the right, you have the matching Sanborn map. This was a pretty major concern. So it actually started out not as Western printing and lithography, but as the Fiat's car plants, because they were actually making Fiats here in Dutchess County. The business started before World War I, before it became briefly unfashionable to have European automobiles. Managed to survive, but by 1934, Fiat had moved on. Western printing came in. It was founded out in the Midwest for its entire run. It was based out of Racine, I think, Wisconsin. I might be a little bit off with the pronunciation there. It's kind of like if you're a Dutchess County historian long enough, every time you see a name spelled M-I-L-A-N, you call it Milan instead of Milan, which always reads very strangely to Italian visitors. But you get stuck in these ruts. So the Poughkeepsie plant is purchased and then expanded, and this becomes one of the two major printing operations. So raise your hand if you're familiar with the Golden Book series for kids. That actually even includes me. I'm old enough. That's where a lot of these are printed. So Western Printing and Lithography, they do all sorts of stuff, including developing juvenile fiction, doing other adult runs, but it's really known for that little Golden Book series that's educated generations of American youth. But they too begin to fall on hard times in the later 20th century. They initially tried to sell off all of their assets except for the little Golden Book series. They rebrand as specifically a children's book company, but even that does not last through the economic overturns of the 1980s, and the business disappears into Random House, Penguin, NBC Universal, but the actual practice itself and all of the great work continues to today, just not in Poughkeepsie. You can see a part of it though, and it is part where as you look at this map, if you look down to the bottom, well actually if you look at this overhead view provided by Dutchess County Public Works through DC Parcel Access, you'll see some warehouses down in the lower right, just where the rail cut for another feeder line up to the hospital runs. The remnants of those warehouses are still there today, but most of the site is occupied by parking for Home Depot and Ocean State job lots, and for the restaurants that are between them and Route 9. So anytime you go and visit those places, think about how the little Golden Book series once occupied that entire site. You know, as you get your fertilizer, your shovel, all that kind of good stuff.
You seen it?
Yes.
Like a little, like they tried classic American. When it was small, I mixed the name of Buffett here.
Hey, Cap. A little bit. I arrived in the county in 2012, so all that stuff was long gone by the time. We have a gentleman here who actually attended some Maris classes over in the old Fiat building before it was taken down. Yeah.
There, we still Fiat. Making Maris class.
Well, you've experienced a great piece of Dutchess County history.
Yeah.
All right, and so we move to our final site for today, which is the children's home of Poughkeepsie, which starts out with a much more complicated name, as you can see up there. In the 1840s, you have a group of concerned women in Poughkeepsie who found an organization that is really dedicated to looking out for both women and children who've fallen on hard times, who can't provide for themselves. They quickly change in 1850, if I get it correct, 62 actually. They change over to focusing just on children, and that's when you have the Poughkeepsie Orphan House and Home for the Friendless, which is more popularly known in the literature as the Home for the Friendless. They set up on the south side of Poughkeepsie initially in a Victorian-era Italian Age-style architecture brick building that is still there today at the intersections. I'm not sure, do I have it in my notes up there? Yes, South Hamilton and Franklin. You can go see it if you want to. It's apartments now. But it is estimated that within approximately their first 20-odd years of service, they managed to serve 1,000 orphan children. And some of these children are actually brought over from the county almshouse, which was at that time located out in the town of Washington. There was a law passed in 1874 by the state assembly that said the children of folks who cannot take care of themselves should not be kept at the poorhouse itself. This is an adult facility. They need to be brought over where they can have the special care and education necessary for raising children. So many of the children who were at the poorhouse were transitioned over to the Home for the Friendless, or today's children's home. Unfortunately, some of them passed away from childhood diseases and are buried today down at Poughkeepsie Rural Cemetery, and there's a story associated with that from the poorhouse. But the Home of the Friendless itself continues to this day as the Children's Home of Poughkeepsie. In 1919, they decided they need more space, so they moved from the south side of Poughkeepsie to the north side of Poughkeepsie, the site they occupy today, which has expanded over time, but which continues to provide outstanding services for Poughkeepsie and the larger Dutchess County and mid-Hudson region, and ensuring that our children who are down on their luck have all of the services they need to excel later in life. So that is your dime tour of the North Side Trail. I am happy to answer any questions, and I will repeat them on the mic so they can be captured for video. But on the other hand, if you would prefer to head on out to the Walkway and enjoy the beauty that is the rest of this day, I won't take it personally. Remember, the bathrooms are at the next stop down. So, are there any questions today? Yes, ma'am.
Is the trail going to extend south through Poughkeepsie?
So the question is the North Side Trail going to extend south as well as north? The hope is that it eventually will extend all the way down that spur line through the center of Poughkeepsie. The onus right now is expanding up to tie into Hudson Heritage, but there are long-term visions of that trail extending to the south as well. So we'll have more opportunities for discussing Poughkeepsie's industrial past. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is he always over Quiet?
So the question is, will the trail go over to Quiet Cove? I believe that the North Side Trail itself terminate at Hudson Heritage, but there are plans being made to provide trail access across Route 9 to Quiet Cove.
Oh.
It's a very big project that DPW and Parks are working hard on with our state partners. Yes, Dan?
Will you bother? You want to open the bottle of the joint here thing?
Oh, and would you like me to mention the Dutchess History Dispatch? So we do run an online newsletter through the Dutchess County Historian's office called the Dutchess History Dispatch. You can find us online either at Facebook or Instagram by just searching for Dutchess History. And if you sign up for that, you'll see all sorts of program announcements for the various public programming that I do throughout the county. Thank you, Dan. Question down here, yes?
Yeah, it's a bit of a job, but is there a means or intent to link with College Hill Park at all?
So the question is, it is a bit of a jog. That's a very polite way to put it. But is there a plan to connect with College Hill Park? I do believe that is one of the visions for developing the south side of the North Side Trail, as it were, following that rail cut down in order to connect other parts of Poughkeepsie, including College Park, into the whole network. It's all about building on the great work that you all have done here at Walkway over the Hudson and with the rail trail itself. I saw another question. Yes, sir.
What part the rail that you
Yes.
where's the criminal that you could work with?
All right, so the question is, was Poughkeepsie once part of the whaling industry? That is correct. At one time, there was such a demand for whale oil that it became profitable to, it's a little gruesome, tow whale carcasses all the way up the Hudson River to have them processed here in Hudson. And then the other question was, where was the oil itself stored? Unfortunately, I do not have an answer right off the top of my head for that. I know that they had facilities not quite at Upper Landing, but pretty darn close. You have the remaining, it's either the Poughkeepsie or Dutchess Whaling Company. There were two that operated at the same time, solely to confuse me in the present when people ask questions. But one of their tenant houses is a restaurant now, and then another tenant house is down next to River Station. They were located all across the Poughkeepsie waterfront. Unfortunately, I'll have to get back to you on where the oil was stored. Any other questions? Yes?
What's definitely planned now from Parker up, to ShopRite? How long is it? How long is the trail?
Ooh, see, so the question is, how long is the planned portion of the North Side Trail from Parker up to Hudson Heritage? That's the problem when you ask a historian anything about numbers. We generally get into history because dates we're pretty solid on. The reigns of monarchs and service of elected officials. Anything more than that? I would give you a ballpark, but I don't want to mislead you. It's long enough to be a great question? No. All right, we might have room for one last question, or we can Yes, ma'am. So the question is, when will the whole thing be completed? Well, with such a wonderful amount of trails and potential systems in place to bring people from the Walkway to the other historical treasures of Dutchess County, I think we have many decades of potential work ahead of us. Because there's just a lot of treasure to show. All right, well, thank you all very much. I'm going to turn it back over to Kirsten. It's cool. And then we'll have you do.
Thank you so much, Will. I think he's answered many questions we all had about this new trail. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody for coming and supporting the Walkway. And we hope to see you all very soon in some more of our events.
Have a great day.